Today I'd like to talk about the E-Myth approach to iterative AI application development. Um, the story starts about 20 years ago. I was pretty early on in my career and I was talking to my financial advisor and I said, you know what, I'm really interested in startups. Do you have any books that you might recommend for someone that's interested in, being part of this dot-com explosion that was happening at the time? And he gave me a book by Michael Gerber called The E-Myth. Now, it wasn't exactly what I was planning on reading, because rather than about teaching me about startups, it was more about building food service franchises. But the metaphors from the story actually stuck with me, and it's something that kind of fits in well with the ideas that we're seeing in building iteratively AI applications for today. And the idea is pretty simple. Basically, whenever you build your food service franchise or your startup or most any type of business that comes to mind, there are certain processes, there's certain tasks, and each of these processes and tasks have steps that have to be accomplished in order to accomplish the full task. Well, if you can start your company and basically work yourself to death initially doing all those tasks or having, programming something to do those tasks, then over time you can figure out, well, this task involves too much human activity. We can write down these tasks and basically create a binder for this book for the E-Myth. We can create a binder to give to someone and say, here is a list of all the processes and tasks. And the more tasks that you write down, effectively you fire yourself from those tasks and then hire someone else to do those tasks. And that way you can, slowly fire yourself from the lower level roles and rise up until you're doing just very abstract work. Same exact thing applies for AI application development. So us get into it. The problem here I see a lot when talking to people that are working on AI applications is they try to do everything at once. They build one giant application. They ask the model to solve the whole problem in a single swoop, and it's basically impossible for a model to do a significantly complicated task. I kind of like the way that Simon Willison put it. The key skill in getting the most out of LLMs is learning to work with tech that is both inherently unreliable and incredibly powerful at the same time. This is a decidedly non-obvious skill to acquire. So the solution, I think, is just what I said earlier. Just like they used to do with restaurant franchises, take your startup, take your enterprise, whatever it is, figure out where it has too much human interaction in it, too much labor intensive, but otherwise kind of trivial tasks. Create a description for those and be able to turn it over to the machines. So let's look at one specific example. In a recent conversation I had, I was talking to a solo founder of a startup, a recruiting company, and I just really liked the way that he was doing things. It kind of reminded me of this process. Basically, his application had several aspects to it, but among those were analyzing the resume and extracting the structured data, evaluating the candidate quality, matching the candidates with job postings, and handling communication with the candidates throughout their job search. And so, what he had done is iteratively kind of it started out as a typical application, but he'd found places early on where he could effectively fire himself, and he was slowly working through the whole stack. And instead of him doing the labor intensive tasks, he was finding more and more stuff that he could offload to the AI agent. So, for example, the first thing that he dismissed was data extraction. It's a lot of work to read resumes and to figure out who's doing what and what qualifications they have, what education they have, and how they match to the job offerings. And the job offerings themselves also included a lot of structured data extraction. So those are really good initial candidates to remove. The next piece that he is currently thinking through is the communication. Whenever you're working with one of these candidates, there's a lot of back and forth conversation in emails, but they typically take very, very similar paths as they're looking through jobs and as they're receiving offers and stuff like that. And if you if a human can understand that there is a set of steps that are typical, and if a human can understand that there is certain types of emails, then you can make it a lot easier on the human by drafting emails for them. Or if that's not quite sufficient, you can have kind of an assistant relationship where an assistant says, "I think you're about to draft this type of email. Here's an outline for it," or here's, are we in the right state? I think there's usually 5 steps in this process. They've been looping around kind of the review step several times, and I think this is the time for this email. But you can do things iteratively to make each step of this process easier on the human by slowly removing the human from the details. Um, so here is the nitty gritty on how to do this for yourself. The first thing you need to do is to start enumerating your possible targets. You're going to look for a task that usually falls in one of 2 categories right now. One category is something that is kind of an assistant interaction where a human and the LLM are working together to um accomplish some sort of task, and the human is generally keeping the assistant on track. The other type of task that you might look for are workflows where the workflow is something that can be enumerated as a certain like set of steps. And if you have one of those, that's a good thing because you can write down these steps like back in the day in the restaurant franchise you'd write down the binder of like here's how the fry cooker works. You can write down those set of steps for how a workflow is accomplished. um, I I think in the future there's gonna be a lot more types of things that we will be able to put in here instead of just this 1 and 2. But right now, it's a good idea to start with tasks that don't require drastic, complex, open ended work. There's a lot of really interesting research that's being done to see if, as we approach like something that looks like AGI, if we can accomplish human level tasks. But all too often, if there's not some sort of human interaction, like a pairing assistant type thing or like a structured set of steps, the large language models still get distracted, get confused, and end up kind of in a despair loop. All right. So once you have your task mapped out, then for each task, this is hopefully in an ideal world associated with a module inside your application, something with a known, well-structured set of inputs and outputs, and something that has a set of to-dos that is easy to describe, or a set of interactions if it's with a person that is easy to outline. So find all these things, make sure they're enumerated, and keep track of which steps are the ones that are most repetitive and time consuming. That's probably the things that you're going to want to start with. And big step 3, fire yourself. So ideally, if you do have a well modularized application, then everything's plug and play. You can do something where basically you pull out the previous interface, and you can plug in something that's kind of like the AI augmented version of it that takes just a few less steps, a few less interactions with the human. Now, it's not always going to be quite that easy. There are messy bits because the human interaction isn't exactly what the AI is going to provide, but that's kind of the ideal. The next step is no one likes it, but evaluations are pretty important. Um, Here, too, though, you can be incremental in your development. So instead of having to, create a whole evaluation framework and make sure it's super duper mature for every little step, um, start off by tackling tasks that are at least somewhat amenable to errors and failures. Something, and then if you've got one of those, try 20, 30 examples. Just create different types of inputs, throw some curveballs, look at all the outputs, be very thorough with this small set, and make sure that none of the outputs are going to be damaging to your application or embarrassing to your business. Um, and then later, it's still a good idea to mature your evaluation setup. We'll probably get into that in some future post, but you can still be kind of incremental in the way you do it. And finally, iterate. The whole point of the E-Myth book was to have a constant stream of these things where you can outline the next most important task, hand that over to someone else, to the AI, and fire yourself from it. And eventually, as you keep iterating through the lowest hanging fruit, you get to the point where you legitimately can't have large language models yet, or you've basically removed yourself from the workings of the company. Um, and the good thing here is, I think we're kind of racing against a technology that's racing really fast right now. So the things that are not quite feasible today with a large language model, I think you'll see that high hanging fruit get lower over time as we realize that, with O1 and this in-depth reasoning, that these things are becoming more and more approachable and amenable to large language models. All right, so that's it for today. If you've liked this, I did write a book, and I write these blog posts all the time. So please subscribe and look forward to more. Thanks.